But without further ado, I would like to pass the floor to Olivier Baudelet from the European Commission for his opening words.
Yes, good afternoon and welcome to this webinar. I'm Olivier Baudelet from the European Commission, DG Regional and Urban Policy, and I'm in charge of this initiative called Impact. It's an initiative by the Commission, which is implemented together with the OECD. And basically, the ambition is to have more cross-border CLLDs in the future. Because currently, when we meet people during our, for example, monitoring committees with programs or stakeholders on the ground, everybody seems to know the leader initiative, and everybody seems to say that leader is great, but there are very few cross-border CLLDs, which basically are the same thing, across Europe. There is only one area where you have them, funded by Interreg. It's at the border between Italy and Austria. So basically, our goal with Impact is to have in the future more cross-border CLLDs, and also to promote these cross-border CLLDs across the EU so that people understand better what to do. With Impact, we will have about 30 pilot projects, 30 cross-border CLLDs, and each of the 30 will benefit from an expert, one or several experts actually, which will come to help them to explain what is a cross-border CLLD, how it works, what are the benefits of it. The expert will also help bringing the communities on each side of the border together so that they can exchange. The expert will also facilitate the discussion so that the stakeholders on each side of the border can agree on the needs that they have, can agree also on what they want to do together. The expert will also help the communities to draft a common strategy. A strategy is something rather short, about 15 to 20 pages, highlighting mainly what is the territory, who are the stakeholders and authorities involved, what are the needs, and what do the communities want to do together. And then projects, actions will derive from this strategy. And our idea is that once we have the project IDs, we, the Commission, we would make the link with the Interreg programs to have these actions and projects funded. There is no guarantee that this will happen, but at least we will try our best to explain that this is important, that we support it, and hopefully, in most of the cases, it will work. And the OECD will also, based on the 30 pilots, draw the lessons and provide analytical tools so that all the regions in Europe can benefit from the knowledge that has been gained with the 30 pilots. One very important element I would like to underline is that as we are talking about cross-border CLLDs, well, obviously, it has to have partners on each side of a border, but also a CLLD is about communities. So the proximity, the geographical proximity matters, because what you want is really communities which are physically close enough to have a lot of interactions. You cannot have a cross-border CLLD with partners which are too far away, because the idea is really, and that's why it's called communities, the idea is really that they interact regularly, that there are people working on each side of the border, that they have common natural areas, that they really have something to do in common. So it's important when you apply to consider that you need to have partners on both sides of the borders, both committed to the cross-border CLLD, and that these partners need to be really in a certain proximity. So I will stop here and wishing you really good luck in your applications. And during this webinar, we will, together with OECD, be there to answer any question you may have. Thank you.
Many thanks, Olivier Badelet, for your opening words. And now I'd like to pass the floor to Renia Michelou.
Thanks, Stefan. And thank you to everyone who is joining us for this call, and good afternoon to you. Also, thank you to Olivier for his remarks and the European Commission for its support for this project. So my name is Verenia Michelou. I lead the work at the OECD on governance and strategic planning for regional development. And our work really looks at how multi-level governance supports regional and local development outcomes in a variety of different ways, including looking at how governments plan and their strategic processes, how they coordinate how different levels of government coordinate among themselves, how stakeholders are engaged, how trust is built in public institutions and between government and communities. And also we look at the administrative capacity that is needed to plan and invest and evaluate projects effectively. And all of these elements are very relevant for cross-border cooperation and development, as well as for this project. And the impact initiative that Olivier outlined, it builds on recent work that the OECD undertook that was also supported by DG Regio. In 2023 and 2024, we worked with 5 European cross-border regions and assessed how different governance arrangements can really help address some of the specific challenges and opportunities that these regions face. And that work resulted in a report in 2024 that highlighted the very strong potential of the EU's cross-border regions and examined factors that can hold back their development. And this report really looked quite closely at governance mechanisms, such as the European Groupings of Territorial Cooperation, or the EGTCs, and other mechanisms that border regions use to address their development gaps and to act on shared opportunities. And these shared opportunities include improving access to healthcare across borders, to strengthening cross-border public transport connections, and to building joint tourism potential. These are just some examples. It also provided practical guidance for local, national, and international policymakers on how to set up and manage effective cross-border governance bodies as a way to strengthen the resilience and the socioeconomic performance of border regions. Now, the Impact Project takes all of this a step further, because at the core of this project, but also at the core of a lot of cross-border work, is participatory governance. And evidence shows that involving communities, this includes civil society organizations, the private sector, and citizens, involving communities leads to stronger and more sustainable development outcomes. But at the same time, this engagement has to be more than, an occasional consultation or consulting too late in the game to make any sort of impact. It really needs to be embedded at the beginning. It needs to be embedded in the strategic processes undertaken for regional development, from design to implementation to the evaluation and learning. So that's the full strategy cycle. And doing so really helps build trust between communities and government. And this is trust the trust that government is going to listen to the community and respond to local needs, but at the same time, on the side of government, trust that communities can provide valuable contributions to a region's development. So this initiative, this Impact Project, is all about this type of community engagement, but it's also about experimentation. And we know that experimentation is increasingly being used to see really what is working, and then to learn from that and be able to scale up and out. And the Impact Project promotes testing new partnership models and new approaches to address cross-border challenges, so CLLDs, for example, as the partnership model, and the challenges such as depopulation, environmental degradation, exposure to natural emergencies such as wildfires, and also limited attractiveness to residents or visitors or investment. So our hope is that the models that come out of this project help cross-border regions throughout the EU, and ideally beyond the EU, to build stronger community-led initiatives and to really realize their full potential. Finally, I think there's been a lot of interest in this project from around Europe. This is our second round of calls, simply because we are looking for a very broad range of candidates. And this is showing a really clear and shared wish to strengthen cross-border regions through more inclusive and innovative governance. So we really hope that today's session will answer your questions. We very much look forward to working with many of you in the months ahead. And again, I'd like to thank you for joining us and for your attention. And also our sincerest thanks to Olivier, to the European Commission, and to DG Regio in particular for their continued support and the trust that they place in the OECD to lead this work. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Verinia and Olivier, for these opening words. Okay, so let me briefly walk you through today's agenda. We will start with an overview of the project, its context, objectives, geographic focus, and support offered to pilot regions. Then we'll move to the call for applications, covering eligibility criteria, the selection process, and what we expect from selected regions. Following that, we will share some key takeaways from the first call for applications, which closed in April. We will then very likely touch upon the process of identifying and mobilizing experts who will support the pilot regions, and then obviously we'll conclude with a dedicated session for your questions. Regarding that last point, we will first address a few questions that we've received frequently over the past few months, and then turn to live questions submitted through the chat. Please note, however, that for this particular webinar, we're not in a position to discuss the details of individual applications received during the first call for applications. Our objective for this webinar is really to give you a clear understanding of both the project and the practical steps for applying and reapplying. Okay. So now in terms of the impact project. Before I present what the project is all about, complementing what Verinia and Olivier already highlighted, I would like to start with a little bit of additional context. First, we see that border regions in and around the European Union matter. In the European Union, they represent 40% of the territory, 30% of its population, and about 30% of its GDP. Yet on average, they underperform compared to non-border regions. For instance, in 2021, as alluded to, GDP per capita in EU border regions was about 14% lower than the EU average, which is quite significant. These gaps are not accidental. They reflect a wide range of overlapping barriers. These include regulatory differences, they include territory and administrative obstacles, as well as language and cultural differences. For citizens, for businesses, and for governments, this translates into concrete challenges, such as gaps in service delivery, including healthcare. It can result in misaligned public infrastructure, such as roads, rail, or energy systems.
Interrupt you very quickly. We do not see the presentation, or we're still
You do
stuck
not-
on the title screen.
Really? Okay. Thank you very much. Let's see how I need to stop sharing, and we'll share again. One moment. Thank you for flagging this. Ta-da. Does this work?
Not yet. Yes, perfect.
Okay, terrific. Thank you very much for flagging. So what I was mentioning in terms of the challenges that businesses, governments, and citizens face, mentioned gaps in service delivery, misaligned infrastructure, roads, rails, energy systems, but also fragmented labor markets across the border. So in short, border regions often face structural disadvantages that require tailored governance solutions, including the ones that Olivier and Rini already alluded to. But this specifically here brings me to community-led local development, or CLLD. And as many of you know, CLLD is really a place-based approach to local development, driven by local partnerships, brings together local governments and non-governmental actors. And just like to share a few of the evaluation results that show the value of CLLD. For example, on job creation, data from an evaluation of the European Maritime and Fisheries Fund show that CLLD was the fund's most effective measure in creating new jobs. And on mobilizing private investment, an evaluation from Galicia in Spain is particularly helpful. It shows that for every euro of public support, CLLD delivered on average €1.06 in private investment. And CLLD also empowers the communities. It gives decision-making power on local priorities and concrete investments to community stakeholders. And it turns them local actors from passive beneficiaries to active participants in communities' own development. Yet despite this track record, CLD is rarely applied in cross-border context. In fact, as Olivier mentioned, only one Interreg program, Italy and Austria, explicitly support CLD in border regions. So this shows a clear untapped potential, and it's precisely this gap that the Impact Project seeks to address. So building on this context, let me now turn to what Impact is, what it intends to achieve. It is a 2-year project. The overall objective is clear from the slide. It is to strengthen community-led local development in cross-border regions by supporting local cross-border partnerships in designing joint place-based strategies, thereby contributing to local economic performance and resident well-being. And it has 2 main objectives as shown on the slide. So on the one hand, it is to support the 30 pilot regions by helping them establish and strengthen governance partnerships and supporting them, importantly, to develop and adopt a cross-border CLLD strategy. And second is to generate this long-term support, including financial, from Interreg programs for cross-border CLLD. So this project, in a way, it's about immediate support to pilot regions and about shaping future policy support for cross-border community-led development. So let me briefly clarify the geographical scope of the project. We are targeting is cross-border regions from all 27 member states, as well as those from selected neighboring countries as shown on the slide, IPA countries, and Moldova and Ukraine. Then, a very important note, partnerships made up entirely out of applicants from non-EU eligible, non-EU member states. It can apply, obviously. However, please note that under the Interreg regulation, CLLD funding through Interreg requires a participation of at least one EU member state. So such partnerships, for example, involving cross-border regions from Montenegro and Albania, it means that funding for strategy implementation will need to come from national, regional, and EU instruments other than Interreg available. Okay, let me briefly outline how the main outputs of the project. These include a CLLD strategy design package for each of the 30 pilot regions, which will include practical guidelines, templates, and tools, and tailored expert advice. Second, we will organize a series of peer-to-peer knowledge exchange events, 4 in Paris and 1 in Brussels. And these will bring together pilot regions representatives, but also for some Interreg program representatives. And here the objective is to facilitate peer learning and to facilitate reflection on CLD, on what works in terms of strategy design, what does not, what tools are needed to improve results, how to secure project funding, etc. And third, and very much building on these exchanges and the work with the 30 pilot regions, we will develop an analytical tool. It is to help, ultimately intended to help non-pilot cross-border regions to design, adopt, and implement CLLD strategies. And this way, the project seeks to go beyond the work with the 30 regions. And fourth and finally, we'll develop a synthesis paper to reflect on the main project findings and issue recommendations. So let me turn to what selected pilot regions will gain from participating in Impact. First, it is tailored expert guidance. So each pilot will be supported by 1 to 3 experts, depending on the number of languages spoken in the region, who will provide hands-on support for the strategy design. Second, we'll provide practical tools and templates that the experts and pilots regions can use. Third, as mentioned, the peer-to-peer exchange. And fourth, advice on funding mobilization. So during multiple events, and also for the experts working with the pilot regions, we'll make sure that they cover capacities and processes for identifying and mobilizing external funding for strategy implementation, even though the accompaniment of through the Impact Project does not involve direct support for implementation or funding mobilization. We want to make sure that the regions are in the best place as possible for strategy implementation after Impact ends. And fifth, We offer strategic dialogue with Interreg managing authorities through the peer learning and exchange events. We hope to facilitate direct engagement with the pilot regions and the program authorities. Regions will be able to present the value of the CLLD initiative, share local experience, and really make a strong case for direct support in the next program period. And finally, the project will help pilot regions gain visibility at both the national and European levels through these activities I just mentioned. Again, an important note is that select regions will not receive direct financial support to develop or to implement their CLLD strategy or related projects. So the support offered through Impact is really technical in nature. The objective is to help regions position themselves strongly for future funding opportunities, but not finance projects directly. The only funding that in fact will be provided will be support the participation of representatives of the pilot regions in knowledge exchange activities in Brussels and Paris. Now let's turn to the preliminary timeline. So last week we launched the second call for proposals. My colleague Alex will discuss this in a bit more detail in a minute. This follows a first call that was launched in February and ended in April. We're currently in the selection of those first pilots. To support the pilot regions for the design of their CLD strategies, we expect this work to run from June, July until the second quarter of 2027, depending on when the work with the region starts. The knowledge exchange activities, the first one will be organized at the end of this year, and the others in 2027, and the analytical tool and final synthesis report to be published in the second half of 2027. Okay, now let's move to the call for applications.
Thank you, Stefan. So in this section, we're going to be talking a little bit about who can apply for this call, how the call process will work, and what commitments are expected of these selected pilot regions. Next slide, please. So first, who can apply? There are a few important musts and must-nots on this slide. First, the musts. Applications must be submitted by legal entities located in eligible countries. I'll flash that up again, the list of eligible countries in the next slide, but Stefan already covered it. Applications also must be joint across the border, across one or more borders, although it can be a land or maritime border. Individuals cannot apply, and national governments cannot apply directly. Here are a few examples of the eligible applicants: regional or local authorities, NGOs or civil society, LAGs, local action groups, or FLAGs, fisheries local action groups, tourism offices, EGTCs, European groupings of territorial cooperation, or Euroregions, or a host of other cross-border cooperation structures. This list at the bottom of this slide is just indicative. We received a lot of questions, certainly for the first round, about eligibility. The important thing is to respect the musts and the must-nots of this slide. Next slide, please. So again, applicants must be located in the eligible countries listed. These are the EU member states, Andorra, Liechtenstein, Norway, Switzerland, the IPA Instrument for Pre-Accession Assistance countries, and Moldova and Ukraine. Next slide, please. Importantly, applications must involve territories with a direct and continuous border, either land or maritime, as Olivier mentioned in his opening remarks. Also, as Olivier put very nicely, don't forget that the focus of CLLD is very much on the local level cooperation. This is typically below NUTS 2 level, just to give you an idea. What we've found is that selected regions are likely to involve municipalities as well as businesses and community organizations. Next slide. So what are the requirements for the partnerships, moving beyond the basic eligibility? First, each application needs to be submitted by a lead partner who speaks on behalf of the cross-border partnership that's going to work together over the course of the project to create their CLLD strategy. These partnerships have to have at least one partner from either side of the border or the borders. They have to designate the lead partner, who then is the one whose name is on the application. And importantly, they have to provide us with a joint declaration of partnership and commitment. This is a document that confirms that all of the partners are aware of what's happening and agree to work together in the project. This is something that can be found in the application guide. Nice to have, but not strictly required for eligibility, are experience in either CLLD or cross-border cooperation and existing cooperation structures. Next slide. So let's move on to the timeline for applications. Applications have been open since the 4th of May, and they are due the 8th of June. The week of the 28th of June, we will, the selection committee will review the applications. The applicants will be notified of the results. In July, we'll be holding brief interviews with each of the shortlisted partnerships, each of the shortlisted regions. And selected regions are then, once they're notified that they have been accepted, they'll begin working towards their CLLD strategy with the support of the expert that they have been matched with. Next slide. This is important. We expect that this will be the final application round, so please do get your applications in before the deadline. Next slide. If your application is selected, there are certain expectations on you, the pilot region. First of all, you as the pilot region will commit to developing and then adopting your cross-border CLLD strategy, working closely with the expert that is matched to you, who's going to provide assistance both in person and online. You also commit to supporting the organization and management of activities in your region, to work with and to engage with the expert that is matched to you. You'll also commit to participating in knowledge exchange and peer learning activities, both online and in person. You'll commit also to facilitating information exchange with us in the OECD project team. We might ask you for information over the course of the project, and we'll need a response from you. And finally, you will commit to providing input and feedback on draft work that is prepared by the OECD over the course of this project to make sure that it reflects your needs and your insights as well. Next slide. One important note on language. The project's working language is English. However, the technical support that will be provided to the experts that are going to be matched to the regions will be, insofar as this is possible, as much as this is possible, delivered in the local language or languages of the regions. For knowledge exchange and peer learning events, we're also going to provide simultaneous interpretation to really try to make sure that language is not a barrier to participating fully in these events. Next slide. So this is the second call for applications, and we wanted to share some takeaways from the first call, really to share with you what made the applications that reached the final round stand out to the committee that reviewed them. We're not going to get into the specifics of the individual regions, but I hope that this information that we're going to share with you will be useful as you're developing your own application. So next slide. First of all, we should note that we received a very wide diversity of applications among applicants. Applicants had first a broad geographic reach coming from almost all of the eligible countries, mostly covering a single shared border, but also sometimes covering a tri-border area. We saw a mix of leading applicants. Some were municipalities, some were LAGs, some were civil society organizations, and more. We saw a very wide thematic diversity with focuses ranging from tourism to local economic development to sustainable mobility to demographic challenges and much more. And finally, we had diverse CLLD and cross-border cooperation experience profiles with some applicants having more or less experience in either of those areas. We tried to maintain diversity among those selected. So what we're ending up with is a really interesting geographic, thematic, and experience-based mix. Next slide. Something that we hope to add to in the second call. So strong applications from the first call stood out in 3 ways. First, the territory that was the subject of these applications was well suited for CLLD. Strong applications covered a coherent cross-border area, one that was small enough to enable very close stakeholder interaction and meaningful community engagement of the type that Olivier mentioned in his opening remarks, yet large enough to support development based on local resources and local assets. When applications did cover a larger region, for example, going all the way up to that NUTS 2 level, the strongest submissions did this in a way that created a clearly defined territorial focus within that area, and also a clear rationale for the involvement of any regional level partners that were operating on a larger scale, such as regional governments. Second of all, in the strongest applications, the partnership was well balanced. Strong applications brought together both governmental and non-governmental actors, with representatives of business and civil society where possible, and showed equitable participation on both sides of the border. No one partner was dominating the partnership. So we have confidence that the strategy coming out of these sorts of partnerships will be one that is truly joint. Finally, strong partnerships showed a very clear rationale for their application. The strongest ones were the ones that established the link between the needs of the territory, the profile and the experience of the participating partners, and the specific benefits of applying a CLLD approach to address those needs in their cross-border region. So they really articulated the added value of CLLD. Next slide. All right, Stefan, back to you.
Thank you, Alex. Okay, now let's move to how experts are identified and matched with the selected pilot regions. So experts will perhaps just a little step back what their role is in this process. Experts will provide hands-on, likely part-time support over a period of between 6 and 9 months. This includes remote work, but also work in the selected cross-border region. Typically, about 2 weeks on the ground. Travel costs, obviously, for these missions will be covered through the project. Experts will deliver targeted training and coaching to strengthen the ability of the cross-border for cross-border CLLD strategy design and for sort of thinking already towards implementation and funding mobilization. They will also facilitate stakeholder processes, including workshops, data gathering, etc., to help build cross-border partnerships or to strengthen those that already exist, to identify shared development priorities, etc. They will also review draft strategy sections and provide technical feedback to enhance clarity, feasibility, coherence of the draft strategy. It is really essential here to stress that the pilot region will take the lead and be responsible for drafting the strategy, with the OECD team, including the CLLD experts, providing advice and feedback. And finally, the experts will also advise on cross-border governance models and partnership arrangements, drawing on existing CLLD experiences and tools, including from the OECD. So how do we identify and match the experts with the selected pilot regions? So first, the expert registration remains open until July of this year. Once pilot regions are selected, we review the pool of registered experts. The experts are assessed on several criteria, including relevant CLLD expertise, both in strategy design, implementation, but also cross-border experience, thematic and country expertise, and crucially, language skills. So based on this assessment, the OECD identifies between 1 and 3 suitable experts for each pilot region. The objective is really to ensure that there's a good match between the region's needs and the experts' profiles, including complementary expertise where relevant. And where several experts are equally suitable for a given region, we may organize a dialogue with the pilot region to confirm the best fit. We will start matching the first cohort of selected pilot regions later this month, and we'll do a second round after the deadline or after the regions from the second call for applications have been selected. So before handing back to Alex, let me highlight one important element in the expert identification and matching process. One is experts may not support the preparation of a region's application and subsequently be contracted to assist that same region as a pilot. And a declaration about this is included in the expert registration form, and all experts must explicitly confirm this as part of their registration process.
Great. So we're now going to transition to the questions and answer part of today's webinar. We have compiled all the questions that we received most during the first call into a frequently asked questions document, which you can find on our website. This is a long list, so I do encourage you to take a look before you put pen to paper for your application, because a lot of, I think, the most common questions are already covered there. In fact, we've selected 4 that stand out as having been received a lot that we're going to cover right now, and then we will open it up to live questions and answers both in the chat and face-to-face. Next slide, please. So one question that we've received a lot is, how can interested applicants find partners? Important to note is that the OECD does not offer a partner matching or a platform on which you can find partners. With that in mind, it's also kind of hard for us to give one-size-fits-all guidance about where you should be looking for your partners. The right partner really depends on your location, on your potential thematic focus, etc. What we do recommend is that you try to build on existing structures rather than starting from scratch. So tapping into relevant networks, things like leader networks, EGTCs, other territorial cooperation platforms, and looking as well for partners that have shared strategic interests that might align in a CLLD strategy. Are there any thematic limitations for the strategies supported under this call? Should they be broad or integrated across multiple themes, or can they focus on a specific sector like biotourism, energy, or mobility? The answer to the first part of this question is short. The answer is no, there are no predefined thematic focus areas. Applicants choose their own focuses. They also choose their own priorities within these focus areas if you're able to define those at this stage. But both the themes and any strategic priorities that you're already able to tease out should be ones that are clearly relevant to your cross-border territory and rooted in those shared opportunities and shared challenges that you're able to identify. Next question, is there a maximum number of partners per application? No, there are not a maximum number of partners per application, but I would recommend that you, the important thing here, I'm going off script a little bit, but the important thing here is to make sure that the number of partners reflects those important core eligibility and positioning questions about, is the territory the right size? Do the partners make sense to represent that territory? And are these the partners that make sense to take forward a potential strategy? Final question we wanted to cover is it necessary to establish new entities to participate, for example, a new local action group? No, you do not need to create a new legal entity to participate. A legal entity has to apply, but it can be one of the partners as they already exist. You don't have to create a new joint cross-border lag or any formal structure to apply. What matters is very much the willingness and the capacity of the partners to cooperate closely on the strategy. No formal umbrella entity needed. So I think that brings us to the end of those 4 key questions that we had picked out, being those we received the most frequently. Now what we are going to do, first, just one more note that you'll find the comprehensive question and answer document with the main questions that we've gotten on our website. The link is in all of our project materials on our websites. It will be again in the slides that we will circulate after the call. So now what we're going to do is we're going to have a live Q&A. It's already suggested that you add questions in the chat, and I see that there's a lively discussion going on in the chat. Please feel free to continue putting questions in there. You can also raise your hand directly on Zoom. So at the very bottom panel, you'll see a heart react if your Zoom is the same as mine. If you click it and raise your hand, you can ask us questions directly. One important note, Stefan mentioned earlier, we're not here to discuss individual cases. So if you can try to please focus on those questions that you think will be of general interest to the others on this call, it would be much appreciated. Thank you. Any hands?
Not yet, but perhaps we're ready to cover 1 or 2 elements mentioned in the chat that perhaps not all have seen. There was one question if the results from the first selection or if regions have already been selected. This I can just mention that we've had short calls with each of set of shortlisted regions, and we will confirm the selection likely later this week, and the results will be shared more broadly afterwards through the different OECD and Commission communication channels. There was also a question on whether the partnership declaration form needs to be signed. That is not the case. It just needs to be filled out, the relevant information of all the official partners or formal partners in the application needs to be listed. Any other questions?
I can answer one from the chat. There's a question. Somebody has noticed that there's an updated call on the website. Have there been any major changes compared to the first version? The answer to this is no. The idea is that we have 2 calls, whereas in both of the calls, we are looking for one of the cohorts that together will make up the 30 cross-border regions that participate in this project and produce their shared CLLD strategies. The one thing to note is that the timeline, because this call is opening up slightly later, the timeline is also slightly shifted for the second cohort.
Then there's another question. What was the average number of partners in the first call? I can cover that one. This varied quite a lot, as Alex alluded to in her presentation of some key takeaways, that we received the variety of both the regions that applied and the regions that were shortlisted is significant, both in terms of who led, with the actor that was leading, the size of the partnership, number of municipalities or local actors involved. It varied significantly from just a few lags or municipalities plus civil society actors to, in some cases, I think, small consortiums of about 30 small communities or 11 lags. This obviously really depends on whether this makes for a good proposal. It depends on the specific needs and priorities of the territory, and the partners' role in addressing those challenges, and whether those challenges can effectively be addressed through CLLD. So there's no golden formula or no average that should be hit. It really depends on the characteristics of your region. Please also feel free to, if there's no time to write the email, write a question in the note. Please feel free to raise your hands and to state your question in that way.
Maybe I can try to reply to one of the questions from Laetitia Pajot, whether the funds of the project would be allocated to the Interreg program or paid directly to the cross-border CLLD. Well, to do the work under impact. There is no funding which is then sent to the cross-border CLLD which has been selected. The benefit was presented in one of the earlier slides, and one of the biggest benefit is the expert which will come and which will help the cross-border CLLD to be established. And that expert would be then for free in a sense. Indeed, once the strategy has been established, there would be actions or projects that the cross-border CLLD would like to do. And here, ideally, the funding of these actions and projects should come through the Interreg program of the area in which the cross-border CLLD is operating. But first, there is no guarantee that this will happen. It depends very much on the program. It's them who will decide whether they should fund the projects or not. We and the Commission, of course, we will encourage the programs to do so. But there is no guarantee. And second, yes, the amounts will come in deduction of the budget of the program, because it's the program who would then fund the actions and projects out of its own budget, if you want. So it will come in deduction to their own budget. I hope this replies to the two questions.
Thank you very much, Olivier, for those answers and clarifications. We have a question from Nina Dimitrova, who asks about the limited number of symbols or characters that can be used in the application form. Which would be more important to include: statistical information such as the area in square kilometers and the number of citizens, or a clear representation of the main focus of the application. That depends on the question being asked. No need to include significant number of statistics in the application. A brief description of the territory, the square kilometers, is good, but that is only part of the description of the territory. And the main focus of the application that can be obviously included there as well, but there are distinct questions in the application reform that refer to that, such as the rationale for the application, or for applying and for wanting to apply a CLLD approach to the cross-border area, as well as the question on thematic focus areas.
Can I add on to that? The best advice that I could give you, Nina, and the others listening on this call, is really to go back to those 3 characteristics of a strong application that I shared earlier. So if you're thinking about putting statistical information such as the area in square kilometers, like Stefan said, that can be really useful information, especially if that information is information that shows how the territory is well suited for CLLD and gives us a sense of what the territory looks like. And I would say that for anything that you're thinking about putting in your application, give it a run by those 3 characteristics. The second part of your question, I don't think Stefan had a chance to answer. Do evaluators take into account the information provided in the additional information section? The evaluating committee, in order to reduce bias, follows a process that is very common in these sorts of applications, which is they look question by question and assign a score based on the different criteria that have been established previously. The additional information section is an unscored section. So this information can be useful to us to better understand you, but it is an unscored section. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Alex. Next question from Aldin Izidri. Are experts employed full-time or part-time? Sorry if I missed this during the presentation. In principle, this is part-time. We do not foresee this requiring 40 hours for a period of 6 to 9 months. But the details for this depend on the region and the expert. We say sort of the constellation. If there's one expert contracted to work for a specific region, this may require sort of a higher number of days than if 2 or 3 experts are contracted for the same region. So this depends on the region and the configuration of the experts. I see that there are a couple of questions regarding the characters, the limit of characters. Well, we did not identify this as a challenge when we reviewed the first set. We will make sure to review all of this after today's call, just to make sure that there are no further problems. If, as of tomorrow, this problem reappears, please do not hesitate to reach out to us to the email that hopefully Jerome can put in the chat. So we can address any technical issues related to that. Then there is a question on the exchange with the Interact managing authorities. As commented during the presentation, the exchange with Interact managing authorities will take definitely place in the form of peer-to-peer or knowledge exchange meetings. For example, one dedicated particularly to or specifically to Interact program representatives, but we also foresee an activity that brings together both representatives from the pilot regions and Interact program representatives. In addition, the project will try to leverage meetings with as part of the Interact program to present information on the selected pilots. And I think on a case-by-case basis, we will see to what extent the CLD experts will engage directly with the Interact managing authorities. This depends on the context specifics. Thank you very much, Jerome, for adding the email. Are there any other questions? Any hands raised? I do not see them so far. Alex, did I miss a question?
I think we're up to date, but if we have missed your question, please post it again in the chat.
There's a question on limitations about the country of residence of the experts. No, in principle, there are no limitations on that. What matters is the thematic knowledge regarding CLLD, possible experience regarding cross-border cooperation, and language skills. Those are the main elements that we look for. Just keep the chat open for a little bit longer, a minute or so. So see if additional questions come in. Again, if you wish to do so, please raise your hand so we can pass the floor to you. I see an additional question has come in. Is an EGTC Euroregion with a very broad geographical coverage while focusing on the cross-border area in the shared living areas life basins suitable for this goal? The governance will be multi-level and diverse from municipalities to regional governments. In principle, there is definitely no objection to this. In fact, several of the applications that we've received, also the stronger ones, involve an ETTC. This is not a necessary condition, but it can show a level of sort of governance stability. At the same time, we know that some ETTCs have include only a few local governments and focus on a specific territory area, where others cover large swaths of cross-border territory. In such cases, in the latter, I would like to again point to the first point that Alex presented on key takeaways, that for example, a proposal could include as a lead applicant an EDTC with a broad focus, but then in the description of the rationale in the territory, it would be great to see a specific focus, geographical focus, with reasons for why a CCC LLD approach would be beneficial. Sometimes it can also be sort of, this links to the broader point of involvement in the application or in the partnership of not two regions, which sometimes does make sense because not two regions hold specific, for example, regional governments hold specific tasks and responsibilities to help address a very concrete cross-border challenge. So that could be one way sort of to justify the involvement of a large territory or a large regional government, but to address a specific community or local level challenge. Looking at my colleagues to see if any additional questions have come in. This not being the case, I would just like to share my screen again for the last slide. One moment. There we go. Okay. Just to conclude, we would like to very briefly touch upon a few next steps. So the first is that we will make the PowerPoint presentation available. We will share it by email to all those of you who have registered. And we'll also include a link to the recording of today's webinar, which will also be posted on YouTube. And we'll also make sure that a link to this webinar is posted on the project website. In the remainder of May, we will contact the first group of CLLD experts to match them with the regions selected in round 1. So the call that closed in April. Then looking forward to June. Please, if interested in participating or applying, please submit your applications by Monday, June the 11th via the Microsoft form link that is posted on our website. And please take care to read the instructions carefully, including the reference document that that Alex referred to, as well as the frequently asked questions page that is available on the website. Applicants will be informed of the selection results by the end of June. And once the participating regions are confirmed, we will in July contact a second group of CLLD experts to accompany them. Many thanks for your interest in this project. Many thanks for all of your questions, for the lively engagement, the comments, the suggestions. Many thanks also to Olivier Mollet from the Commission for participating in this call and for the continued support. And we look very much forward to receiving your applications. Thank you all very much.